And welcome back, rugby fans, of Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is our Week 10 preview of the 2025 MLR season, the first week of Storm Week. And again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have a video that's right now on my channel that talks all about Storm Week. Basically, in a nutshell, it's a way for Major League Rugby to deal with the fact that the USA national men's team is going to be playing a couple of games in the summer. It is the summer tour of rugby. If you haven't seen my video, I do have a video talking about that on my YouTube channel as well. And because of that, and the way that those matches have lined up, it is going to be right after the Major League Rugby Shield Championship at the end of the season. In order for that to happen, in order for the season to end, to give the players that are on the men's national team that are also playing in Major League Rugby time to play in that championship game and then have time to practice before the beginning of the USA Eagles men's summer rugby tour, they have to make sure the season ends earlier than originally planned. Last season, if you remember, there were a couple of men's national games that took place during the playoffs of Major League Rugby last season. It throws off the teams tremendously because, again, a lot of these players are, not necessarily the best players, but definitely talented players, and you'll have a lot of teams that unfortunately have to give those good players over to the men's national team to play in these national test matches, and it's not fair for the team that they're leaving in Major League Rugby because they're not playing with their best players, and they might be playing against another team who has more international players, who have a lot more stars that are international, so it kind of changes things a lot. WER is facing that right now. If you pay attention to WER, which of course I cover as well, they're going to be facing that right as we speak, actually, because they are getting ready to play against Japan as well as start their Pacific Nations run. So a lot of the women Eagles players that are on the teams in WER, they have already left their teams in order to start training and play for those matches. I believe the women's team is already in San Diego right now, getting ready for the game against the Japanese women's national team, which will be at Wallace Edinburgh Stadium right before the RFCLA play against San Diego. So again, you're having a lot of the teams in WER, well actually, one in particular, the Denver Onyx, completely gutted of their star players because they're all playing in that women's national team. It's something that WER really couldn't avoid, but it is something that Major League Rugby can avoid, and that's what they're doing. So basically what they're doing, instead of a full 18-week schedule, they're cramming 18 weeks into 17 weeks, and it's called Storm Week. So I know it was a lot more explained than I probably should have, because if you watch the video about Storm Week, that explains everything. But with that being said, instead of our usual 5 games, 4 or 5 games within one weekend, which is usually Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday as well, we now actually have 7 games in 5 days: Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 6 days. Okay. First time that's happened, and it's not going to be the only time that's going to be happened. This Storm Week is actually more of a storm month. The following 4 weeks, actually more like month and a half. Storm month and a half is going to be a bunch of games shoved into that time period. And you're going to see teams that are normally practicing or preparing for 6 days right before their next game actually might have to play games a lot earlier. And that's going to put a lot of wear and tear on teams. So, as I mentioned in my Storm video, it's going to be interesting to see what the team management is going to be. Who's playing in what games? How many of these games are your consistent core players playing? And will some of them sit out just to preserve them? It's going to be interesting to see how some teams deal with that, especially against also certain opponents. So, with that being said, the first game is a very interesting indicator so far. So, That being said, sorry, talking way too much about it. You can just watch the Storm video and explain everything. But that being said, all the games that we're talking about, you can watch live or on demand on ESPN Plus here in the United States, or internationally you can watch on the Rugby Network, absolutely free. If you don't want to pay for ESPN Plus, you can always watch it 3 days, 72 hours after they're first aired on replay with the Rugby Network, but otherwise they are on demand or live on ESPN Plus. We start, like as I mentioned before, on Friday. So Friday Footy comes back with 2 games. One of them, the really interesting one, New England Free Jacks that seem to have found their mojo back, going over to Veterans Memorial Stadium to take on Anthem Rugby Carolina, who are still looking for their first win in franchise history. They are on a 24-game losing streak, the biggest streak in Major League Rugby history. Will they break that streak against New England? Again, New England is now on a streak of their own. 3 games after starting 2-3 of the season, winning 3 games straight, looking very, very impressive. What's going to be interesting, and I'm not going to say that New England will do this because you don't want to give Anthem much leeway. A lot of the games that Anthem has played, they've come very, very close. Very few of their games this season have been blowouts like it was in season 1. A lot of the games have been lost by less than 10 points. Will New England, because New England has to then play on Tuesday against RFCLA, so literally a 3-day turnaround to play 2 games in 3 days. 2 games in 5 days. So they have a 4-game turnaround, that 4-day turnaround that they have to play Tuesday against RFCLA, a very tough RFCLA. Granted, they'll be playing at home, but will they, instead of their usual 6 days preparation, they only get 4, will they let the core stars of their team play against Anthem? Will they risk it? Will they let their star players rest, play against Anthem, knowing 4 days later they then have to play a very tough RFCLA team, granted at home? So that's what's going to be interesting in these next couple weeks. What is going to be the team makeup of these teams? Because it's not just Anthem and New England that have to face this. Everybody's going to have to face this. Now, if you watch my Storm videos, some teams a little bit more so than others, so I talk about that as well. But New England does, like I say, they have 2 games in 5 days. Will they have a strong core team taking on Anthem Rugby? And will that make a difference? I gotta say, to be honest, I think New England will play with the majority of their star players. Now, I don't know how long, though, because if they start taking this game away, they might rest their players early. But with that being said, I feel, again, I don't think they're going to let Anthem, they're not going to take Anthem lightly. They'll play their star players. Therefore, they'll win. But it will be a close game. I don't think Anthem will be blown out by New England in this contest. Moving on then, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Friday, we have a big game, Chicago taking on Seattle in Starfire Stadium. Seattle, unfortunately, not doing so well this season. They are coming off of a bye. Usually I would say teams that come off of a bye end up losing. Utah has proven me wrong just recently. Will Seattle do that? I don't know, but I'll be honest, Chicago has been looking hot so far this season. Interestingly enough, in this rivalry, Seattle has never lost to Chicago. These teams have played against each other 3 times already. Seattle's won all 3. Last time that they played in Starfire Stadium, Seattle dominated Chicago back in 2023, 35-13. Obviously, this is a completely different Chicago team. This is a Chicago team that is looking amazing right now, and Seattle not so much. I'll be honest, I'm curious to see what a bye week has done for Seattle. I don't know if it will improve them. I think Chicago has all the momentum. But what will be really interesting is what will Seattle do after if they lose this game? Because then they also have in 5-day turnaround, they have to then take on Anthem in Anthem, Carolina. Will Seattle have their star players play against Chicago, or will they wait in order to dominate against Anthem in the next game? Again, interesting things to think about. Interesting to see what the roster makeup is before. I don't have the luxury of waiting before then, but I do think Chicago ends up breaking the losing streak to Seattle and get their first win against Seattle. Moving on to our next slate of games on Saturday, April 19th, we have a full day of rugby. First, starting off 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, an Eastern Conference showdown between the Miami Sharks and Old Glory. Miami coming off an impressive win against Houston, while Old Glory falling flat to the NOLA Gold. Every time that these two teams have faced against each other so far, they faced against each other 3 times. 2 of them won by Old Glory, 1 by Miami. There's only been no more than a 5-point difference. The games have been very, very close. Last time that these two played in Old Glory, DC, last time these two faced against each other was last year. Miami lost by just 2 points. So, this is going to be a very, very close game. I'll be honest, even though Miami did win against a very tough Houston team, and Old Glory did fall flat, I think just because of the pitch being at home, I think Old Glory rebounds and wins, but it's going to be a very, very close game. Like I mentioned before, none of these games have been, the difference between these two teams have never been more than by 5 points. I feel this game will also be a very close game as well. Moving on to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So the beauty of this day is that you can watch every game in its entirety because they're separated, by a good 2-hour chunk. So thank you, Major League Rugby, for that. We have NOLA going against Houston, 2 teams that have kind of been going in opposite directions, surprisingly. NOLA is on a 2-game winning streak, just defeated Old Glory. Houston on a 2-game losing streak, just losing to Miami, and then before that, RFCLA. In this rivalry, it's been pretty close. These two teams have played against each other 7 times. NOLA has won 4 out of those 7. Houston's won 3. Last season, these two played in NOLA. The score was 26-7. Houston won. Even though NOLA did win last week, I still think Houston, again, home pitch advantage means something. I think Houston will rebound. Granted, that being said, if Davy Coutier comes back, I'll be a lot more confident in my pick. If Davy Coutier is out, maybe NOLA pulls it off, but I still feel on paper, overall team construction, Houston has the stronger team. Then our final game is a Western Conference showdown between 2 strong teams, though one of them is struggling quite a bit. The Utah Warriors taking on the San Diego Legion. This game can determine who is sitting at top of the Western Conference by the end of the week number 10. Utah is looking very hot after dominating RFCLA. San Diego, after starting off hot themselves, 5-1, dropping the last 3 games. In this overall rivalry, San Diego pretty dominant over Utah. 8 wins to Utah's 2 wins. Last season, Utah won when they played in San Diego, but they only won by 1 point. Now, I don't know what's going on with San Diego, to be honest. I don't know what it is with the players that have made any difference. I don't think there's been serious injuries to the team, but they have just not been looking very good. Even though they're back home, and I know I picked the other 2 teams simply because of the pitch, Utah, good Lord, Utah has actually looked really good this season, and I feel the win against RCLA, the momentum is all Utah. So I feel Utah will go into San Diego, beat them, and then claim the top spot in the Western Conference. And as I mentioned before, if you are a Subaru Pick'em member in my Subaru Pick'em pool, don't forget we have 2 extra games this week as part of Store Week. So again, kind of throws things off a little bit. Don't forget to get these two picks in. You could always wait until after the first weekend of games to get these ones, because obviously how things turn out with the teams, especially these 3 teams that have already played prior, what they're going to do in this next game might change, right? So it's going to be very, very interesting to see. So we continue on with Tuesday. We have an MLR game. RFCLA goes over to New England to take on the New England Free Jacks, your reigning defending MLR two-time champions. In a rematch from week number 1 where RCLA was actually up on New England in the first half and then ended up losing 24-17 in the second. A heartbreaker of a loss. Again, this game is going to be interesting because, again, I'm curious to see what New England does in their prior game, which they just played only 5 days prior against Charlotte Anthem, Carolina. And was that a full team? Was that these core players? Or did they rest their core players, knowing that they still had RCLA to play against in a very short turnaround of 5 days? Normally, again, most rugby games, you have at least a week, at least 6 days, you know. You're losing 1 day, as well as you also have a travel day in between, because New England was at Anthem, and now they have to fly back home. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams, and it's not just New England, it's all the teams are going to be affected by this, some more so than others. Watch my Storm Week video as I explain things. Likewise with RCLA. What is the team makeup going to be going over to New England? Because then 5 days later, they are going to fly back home to face against San Diego in a very important Cali Cup, which, by the way, is the first half of doubleheader, because right after that game with RCLA and San Diego at the Walls Annenberg Stadium will also be the USA Women's National Eagles team taking on the Women's National Japan team. Sorry, didn't know why that took a while to get out. So, what is the team that's going to be facing New England? Is it going to be the same team as the one that's facing San Diego? Will New England have any injuries coming out of Anthem and enough time to rest and recover? Storm Week is going to be throwing everything away in a whack, which is why it's called Storm Week, I'm assuming. So, with that being said, like I said, this is a rematch from week number 1 where RCLA lost. RCLA has not beaten New England the last 2 times that they played against each other. I'll be honest. Kind of being a little homer here. I feel, again, RCLA has the ability to win. Now, also, too, we don't know the status of Philatone Penny, who has been phenomenal for New England. Will he be able to play in these next couple of games? Or will they let him... I think they might let him rest to not worry about Anthem and then be able to face RCLA. Will he be there? Will Jason Pachos be back? There's a lot to wonder. I'm going to be a homer on this because I think RCLA has the ability to win this game, because they were close in beating New England at home. We'll see what happens when they travel over to New England. Then, last game of our first week of Storm Week is Wednesday, April 23rd. Seattle taking on Anthem. Both of these two teams have already played within the week already. This will be the second game in 6 days for Seattle and the second game in 6 days for Anthem. Again, normally you're only playing 1 game within a week. These two teams are playing 2 games within 6 days, so they've lost a day of preparation. And some of you may not feel like that's a big deal. It is a big deal for a lot of teams, and it's going to actually get progressively harder as we discuss Storm Week in my video of Talk About Storm Week. Now, beauty for Anthem is Anthem will be still at home after they played against New England to host Seattle, so they're not going anywhere. Seattle, though, has to go from Seattle over to Anthem after playing against, after hosting Chicago on Friday. So, again, what is the state of Seattle? Will Seattle have their full roster from the Chicago game going over to Anthem? Not giving Anthem any slack, but maybe Seattle not traveling with the full core team because they're facing against Anthem, who possibly will still be looking for their first win and on a 25-game losing streak. If anything, I feel this is going to be the game for Seattle to kind of get right. Hopefully, they have not lost to Anthem. They've only played each other twice, but both of those games were pretty much a slaughter for Seattle. Again, I think right now it's already kind of a panic season for Seattle. If they lose to Anthem, I think it's definitely a panic season. And again, I'm curious to see what happens if Seattle does lose to Chicago. Is the team completely lost at that point? Will Coach Clarkey have his team still? Again, it'll be very interesting to see how this turns out. But with that being said, I'm going to still say Seattle wins this game pretty dominantly against Anthem to end the first week of Storm Week. And again, there's a lot more of this craziness with the scheduling in the next month and a half. I'll go over it in my Storm video, so be on the lookout for that. And yeah, that's it. So don't forget, all these games you can watch live or on demand on ESPN Plus in the United States. Internationally, the Rugby Network. You can also watch it on tape delay in the Rugby Network if you don't want to pay the extra price of ESPN Plus. But again, that is our review. It's a little bit longer than normal because there's 2 extra games to cover and a lot to discuss about Storm Week. Storm Week! Thank you very much for checking out my videos, and I'll see you on the pitch.